All right, so we're picking up with the cloud of unknowing. We are on chapter 11, on page 144. And last week we were talking about how to know when a thought is not sinful and when a sinful thought is capital or venial. And today, chapter 11, it says each thought and impulse is to be given its proper value. Carelessness in venial sin is always to be avoided. All right, so the venial sins are not they won't send you straight to heck. They won't send you straight to heck without a return ticket. So, but they should still be taken seriously. He says, I do not say this because you or any of the others I have mentioned are guilty and burdened by any such sins, but because I want you to reckon each thought and each impulse at its proper value, and to work earnestly to destroy the first impulse and thought of those things in which you can thus commit sin. For there is one thing I must tell you, that he who takes no account of, or pays little heed to the first thought, even though there is no sin in it for him, whoever he may be, he cannot avoid carelessness with regard to venial sin. No one can keep absolutely clear of venial sin in this mortal life. However, carelessness in venial sin should always be avoided by all true disciples of perfection. Otherwise, I would not be surprised if they soon commit grievous sin. This is very true. Although, in the Vedanta we take quite a different route of things rather than grading and registering sins as different types and different severities. We kind of recognize that all sin is born out of identity with body mind. That selfishness comes from the being a particular, being a small particular, like a body mind, and then the selfishness born of the body wanting to take care of itself first kind of grows into a worldview. And so, really, it's that confusion of not knowing yourself to be spirit and not knowing the nature of yourself as being love, wisdom, and being, that's really what leads to the errors or the uh, what shall we say, the distorted actions that many call sin. And the venial and capital, okay, well, whatever. I don't have much to say about that. It's just that sin is unhelpful, regardless of what you call it or how severe it is. And if you do not at least stay aware of those things and keep a steady effort on staying present and aware so that you can avoid falling into those sense traps, really, then it becomes more and more difficult. The more and more leeway you give yourself, then the more and more difficulty there is around it. And so this is why we should be very committed to our practice, to not miss our practices, to not shorten our practices, to not go mindless in our practices, not to just turn it into a rote exercise to quickly get finished, but to keep it as something that we really put our effort into and enjoy the company of the divine, because that helps us to find the motivation and also verifies the truth of the end results of these tendencies and behaviors that arise in the mind when it's confused about who it is. Chapter 12, he goes on, he says, by means of this exercise, sin is destroyed and virtues are acquired. Okay, this exercise, of course, he's talking about is this japa meditation that he introduced a couple of chapters earlier, where you sit and repeat the name with the idea of staying in the presence. And of course, he says, by means of this exercise, sin is destroyed, right? Because you know your true nature and you don't act according to body mind. You act according to the divine principle of the immortal pure self, right? The contented self. He says, if then you are determined to stand and not to fall, never cease from your endeavor, but constantly beat with a sharp dart of longing, love, upon this cloud of unknowing, which is between you and your God. All right, so have that longing for the experience, for the vision of the beloved, of the divine. And he says, be constant. Your practice is like the dart of longing love. It's exactly what Ramakrishna would say. Of course, he didn't say a dart of longing love. He said, have that longing for God. And that is that longing for love, because you've tasted the love of God at some point in your practice. That helps your longing along. Mother seems to every now and then give us a larger than life dose of inspiration through an experience like that. And so he says, keep beat with a sharp dart of longing love upon this cloud of unknowing, which is between you and your God. Well, this cloud of unknowing could also be called the egoism of the individuated self. The narratives that you hold in your mind. These things are the noise, the veil of Maya. Egoism and Maya are synonyms. We cannot see God everywhere because the ego is in between us and the divine. And the ego is making its demands and making and shouting out its accusations and shouting out its desires and keeping us busily distracted from the slow and steady nature of the self, which is rooted in a love, in an unselfishness. Avoid thinking of anything under God, and do not leave this exercise, no matter what happens. Right. So that's very much like Brother Lawrence says. Be constantly aware of the presence of God. Keep the divine in your mind at all times as a reminder of your own nature, your own divinity, and your own potential for being divine. Should you identify with that divinity? If you are not identified with your divine self, then you're not being your divine self. You're being your worldly self. And the worldly self means that you're looking for satisfaction in the senses. You're looking for satisfaction in the world. And that satisfaction lasts momentarily and puts you on a treadmill of repeated action over and over and over and over and over again. And nobody wants a life like that. All of us want a life of spontaneous creativity, pure-hearted feeling and love, and knowing what the right thing to do is at all matters. So avoid thinking of anything under God, and do not leave this exercise no matter what happens. For it alone of itself destroys the root and the ground of sin, which is egoism, which is the forgetfulness of our divine spirit and our identifying with the material, with the created. Right? He says, no matter how much you fast or keep watch, no matter how early you rise, no matter how hard your bed, no matter how rough your hair shirt, yes, and if it were lawful to do so, as it is not, even were you to put out your eyes, cut out your tongue from your mouth, stop up your ears and nose, though you were to cut away your private parts and cause your body all the pain that you could think of, all this would be of no avail at all to you. The impulse and tendency to sin would still be in you, right? And so he's saying go for the root trouble, right? Your confusion with body mind is the root trouble. Go to that. Don't do any of these other. The list that he says there, seems like rather extreme things. But if you look at the history of religion, there's plenty of people that have tried every single one of those options, right? But really, the option is to stand in the light of God and be in the presence always, and do it enough that you come to realize the enjoyment that it is, the peace that is available to you in it. He says, yes, and more than this, no matter how much you were to weep and sorrow for your sins, or for the passion of Christ, or to be ever so mindful of the joys of heaven, what would it profit you? Certainly it would be of great good, great help, great gain, and great grace. But in comparison with the blind impulse of love, there is little it can or may do. Right? So, in comparison with the blind impulse of love, that's love for its own sake. The blind impulse means that it doesn't have an object in mind, it doesn't have a goal in mind, it doesn't have a result in mind. It's loving for love's sake. The what he's causing here is like, if you weep and sorrow for your sins and for the passion of Christ and be oh so mindful of the joys of heaven. These are looking at all of the payoffs and external things having to do with virtue, and not the root cause of virtue, which is simply to have been aware that you are designed to love without cause, right? To love without condition. And that if you can practice that, that nothing else compares to that. Even if you practiced all the other virtues, if you didn't do it for the sake of love, like Corinthians says, you're just going to be a clanging bell or a striking cymbal. You're going to be a mess, right? You'll be a clean mess, but you'll still be a mess because you don't know the why of your religion, right? And if you don't know the why of your religion, how can you possibly be successful at it, right? This, without all those other things, is Mary's best part. Without it, they profit little or nothing. Not only does it destroy the root and ground of sin as far as that is possible here below, but it also acquires the virtues. For when it is truly implanted, all the virtues will be perfectly and delicately implanted, experienced, and contained in it, without any mixture of motive. And no matter how many virtues a man may have, without this, they will all be mixed with some crooked motive, and therefore they will be imperfect. Right. So we're looking for this is kind of a combination of Jnana yoga and karma yoga and a bit of bhakti yoga in there as well, So he's telling us, do this constant thought of God, right? And in that constant thought of God, keep the best part, focus on the love and allowing it to be a response to love by becoming aware of God's unconditioned love for you, right? And that if you can just simply keep that awareness, by nature, you won't go traveling off into the different eddies and narratives that the mind's providing through the senses, which it's prompting you with through the senses, right? Letting you smell pizza, letting you see a beautiful man or a woman, letting you be reminded of an old event by the color of something or whatever. The mind is constant. The world, if the mind is not aware of its nature, then it's going to be taking all of its cues from sensation. And sensation is going to bring you into body mind and going to get you stuck there. Right? It's going to be very hard to break those habits when you want to. For when it is truly implanted, all the virtues will be perfectly and delicately implanted, experienced, and contained in it, without any mixture of motive. Right? And he says, and furthermore, no matter how many virtues a man may have, without this love, they will be mixed with some crooked motive, and therefore they will be imperfect. Right? So if you do them for their sake, as a practice, some motive, and certainly not the least of which, will be a pride in your spirituality, right? Which is one of the worst kinds, to become spiritually proud, because then what happens is all of the tools that we normally use to get out of that situation are the tools that you have used to construct your ego with. And you get into a double jeopardy situation there. It's like they don't work anymore. And so literally the teachings from the sages at that point is to stop practicing for a while, right? Just stop and come back to your miserable self who can't claim even how hard he works on his meditation. And then go through a good study of grace, right? Go through a good study of the nature of God. Go read the books of some of these avatars and compare your life to them and get some humility that way. And then approach the divine name out of love. Approach the divine name not for a reward, not for being a good spiritual person, but simply because of the love that's in it, that it represents, that it inspires, that it offers, that it describes, right? That it effuses, right? For virtue is nothing else than an ordered and controlled affection, which has God for its single object, himself alone. For he himself is the pure cause of all the virtues. So much so that if a man is moved to any virtue by any other cause besides God, even though he is in the chief, even though he is the chief cause, that virtue will be imperfect. An example of this may be seen in one or two virtues which can stand for all the others. The two virtues, meekness and charity, are good examples. For whoever can have these two, he would clearly need no others. He would have them all. Right. Well, we know from from Vivekananda that the one definition we're looking for, what is virtue? Virtue is anything that leads toward a unity, toward a oneness, right? And vice is anything that requires two or more. The vice is anything that takes you toward multiplicity, right? In your thinking. So oneness and love are synonyms. Oneness and virtue are ethical, are ethical, yeah. And anything done toward the multiplicity, right? Enjoying separateness or requiring division, anything moving in that direction is a vice and will be unhelpful to you in the long run.
But can I ask a question?
Uh-huh.
Um, would be like a warrior, like in India, there is a warrior caste, Kshatriya, right?
Uh-huh.
They intend to protect, to basically kill, if needed, other people, right? So that
Mm-hmm.
would be under yama niyama. So their profession engages in actually killing, intentional killing. Would it be, how would you consider it in terms of virtue?
Well, Vivekananda says that for the householder, righteous war or defensive killing is required at some point. Not that, hopefully not for everybody, but that there does come a time when it's appropriate for a practitioner, for a householder, to defend his family, to defend those entities that the divine has given him to protect and to be a part of.
So
And so.
that would then, I'm sorry, that would be
Mhm.
um, kind of would cover also your clan, whatever your clan is, or your village, your country
Yes.
as well.
Yes, as long as the war is a righteous war. You know, we run into some problems in the modern world because most of our wars nowadays are about money
Mm.
or about oil, keeping us rich. Um, those are not really righteous wars. But, you know, for a country that's being run on the principles of the divine, there is a time when it is proper to defend yourself, proper for a righteous cause. You know, World War II was probably our last righteous cause. Um,
Right, Bhagavad Gita talks about it, right? That
Yes, yeah. The only for monks, it's not allowed under any circumstances. For monks, they are to take what comes. They do not lift up their hands to protect themselves or anyone else. Their instructions are to accept the moment as it is. But for householders, Vivekananda makes it very clear. No, for householders, they have a different dharma, a different duty, and their duty was to protect their family and their loved ones. So. Yeah, so duty plays a big part in it. Nothing is quite black and white. It's a matter of principles. And so in that there are times where killing is righteous living, you know. Uh, yeah, World War II is a great example. Nazis was an easy one, you know. It's like that definitely needs to be fought. We've gotten a little confused these days, but nonetheless, you know, there are righteous wars where it is the duty to kill. And you know, we wrestle with that.
it's when it comes to nitty-gritty to determine what's what, that's where it's confusing and hard to really understand if it's righteous cause or not. Because, it all depends on so many other ways of evaluation. Evaluation is very hard nowadays, but it's a different topic. Sorry, don't want to.
Yeah. Yeah, and that would be the first thing you would have to do is decide, is this a righteous war or not? Because we just saw in our book reading, was it Vibhishana decided it wasn't a holy war on the side of uh, help me, Haima, what's his name?
Ravanasura?
Ravana. There we go. That Ravana's war was not a righteous war.
Exactly.
And so he abandoned his post. And because it wasn't a righteous war and he abandoned his post, he wasn't treated as a traitor. And when it was over, he wasn't killed for desertion because it was recognized he made a reasonable call, of conscience. And and so we see, that's kind of how it should work. Those who went ahead and fought, what to say, you know, they went ahead and fought. But was it a righteous thing? Clearly not. Yeah. Chapter 13, the nature of humility, perfect and imperfect humility. Let us look first at the virtue of humility, see how it is imperfect when it flows from any other source which mingles with the chief, though this be God, and how it is perfect when its single source is God himself. First, if the matter is to be truly apprehended and understood, we must know what humility is in itself. Then we shall be able to understand more clearly in truth of spirit what its cause is. In itself, humility is nothing else but a man's true understanding and awareness of himself as he really is. Wow, I'm quite surprised by that beautiful admission here. Just just when I'm thinking, oh, he's going to mess up this point, he says it perfectly. In itself, humility is nothing else but a man's true understanding and awareness of himself as he really is. That you are divine, that you are the image of God, that you are immortal, that you are not material, that you are the whole and not a part of the whole, that the world is in you, you are not in the world. If you can work from that framework and understand that the only true things about you are love, wisdom, and presence, from those flow all virtue. When you start putting bodies and minds in there and all the interests of bodies and minds, that's when you get the smallness, right? And when you get that smallness, your body starts wanting to build itself up to be secure in its smallness. And that's going to be a lot of vice, right? It's going to be a lot of vice. So, a man's true understanding and awareness of himself as he really is. It is certain that if a man could truly see and be conscious of himself as he really is, he would indeed be truly humble. Not just truly humble, he would be truly virtuous. All of the virtues would come to him, right? There are two causes of this meekness. One is the foulness, wretchedness, and weakness into which a man has fallen by sin, right? This is basically the fruit of egoism. That's what the curse of the garden was, that you would have to toil all the days of your life to pay for your desires. Now, since you stepped into your senses and are looking at them for your definition of self, you're going to be constantly having to rebuild and build up yourself and your idea of yourself because you're going to be a small man in a large world, right? And so you're going to need all of those things. You're going to need to be a little mean. You're going to have to make sure you cap on the other person before they cap on you. Make sure that you go to the gym lots so you be a good fighter and be strong enough to take anyone out. All those things come from being small, being body mind. So the foulness and wretchedness and weakness into which a man has fallen by sin, as long as he lives in this life, no matter how holy he is, he must always experience this in some measure. The other is the superabundant love and worthiness of God himself. At the sight of this, all nature trembles. All learned men are fools, and all saints and angels are blinded. So much so that if it were not for the wisdom of his Godhead, whereby due proportion is set between their contemplation and their natural and grace-given capacity, I would be at a loss to say what would happen to them. Right? And so we have to, through our discernment, right? This is that exercising of finding what is real and what is unreal. Right? Ramakrishna is saying that whatever is real is unchanging, and that the changing alone, uh, that the unchanging alone is real. Right? And so we go looking for what is that unchanging aspect in us. It is Satchitananda, right? And so we pay attention to our nature as Satchitananda, which is always the same. We are always love. We are always wise. We are always present, right? And so it's building your sense of self on that. So that which is loving is acceptable behavior. That which is wise is acceptable behavior. Anything done with presence, with an awareness of isness and the presence of the divine within yourself, that will all lead to virtue, right? But if we leave that, if we leave God out and we just think of ourselves and try and do what's right, there's going to be lots of sand and sugar mixed in there. So your general effect will be good, but it won't be pure. You'll have problems. Like it's like what you do. If you serve a person, a homeless person, and you go and you make them lunch every single day or make them food 2 or 3 times a day and you take it to them, and they just start accepting it without much thought, it won't be long before your ego infects it, and you're thinking to yourself, "Gosh, I've been doing this for so long," and he's not really appreciating it. He's not saying thank you in the right way to me, and he's taking advantage of me, and eventually you'll stop, right? Because ego, no matter how faint it is, will always poison the pie. It's always going to make you think at some point that you're not getting enough respect. you know, I don't get enough appreciation. The second cause of humility is perfect because it will last forever. Right? So this humility built on the presence of God within and built on the expression of the nature, that divine nature within, that humility lasts forever because it's natural. You're not doing it. It's spilling out of you. It's your knowledge of being one with all things. So there's not that division. I'm better than. I'm more important than. I'm richer than. I'm cleaner than. I'm more beautiful than. The first cause is imperfect, not only because it is to pass away at the end of this life, but also because it can often happen through the abundance of grace which increases its desire as often and for as long as God deigns to grant it, that a soul living in this moral flesh may suddenly lose and forget all awareness and experience of its own being, so that it takes no account of its holiness into this wretchedness or this wretchedness. But whether this experience happens often or seldom to a soul so disposed by God, my belief is that the experience lasts only for a very short while. During this time, it is made perfectly humble, but it has neither knowledge nor experience of any cause but the chief one. But whenever it has a knowledge and experience of the other, along with the chief cause, then its humility is imperfect. It is, however, good, and we must always have it, and God forbid that you should understand it in any other way than what I say. Right? So, just this notion, stick to virtue that flows naturally from you, uh, identifying with your divine nature, and that anything coming from a hunger or a thirst, right? And hunger and thirst would mean not just food and drink, but anything that's a hunger for that you believe will make you whole, that you will believe that will make you happy, that you believe will is a necessary component of yourself. If you go chasing anything outside of yourself, you can know that your humility is in question. It won't last the test for sure, and your actions will have a level of impurity that eventually is going to choke them, that eventually is going to cause trouble and suffer, right? In chapter 14, he says, "In this life, It is impossible for a sinner to reach the perfection of humility unless imperfect humility comes first. Okay. Um, I read that and I'm like, who cares? That may be, that may not be, doesn't matter. Just that you're on your way, you're going to do it the imperfect way, but eventually you get to the perfect way. That's fine. No issues there. I would rather have this true knowledge and experience of myself as the wretch I am, even though I call it imperfect humility, because I believe that it would quickly obtain for me the perfect cause and perfect virtue of humility, sooner indeed than if all the saints and angels in heaven and all men and women who are living on earth in the Holy Church, religious or secular, in every degree of life, were all of them together to do nothing but to pray to God for me to obtain this perfect humility. Yes, indeed, it is impossible for a sinner to obtain the perfect virtue of humility, or to keep it when it is acquired, without the imperfect humility. And I don't know why that's important that that be true. I'm not even sure I know why that's true. I don't think that it's necessarily true. Um, there is a period of time where you don't know that you are not realized, but you're very spiritually engaged. That might be what he's talking about. That part leads you to the grace of God. But until we have that grace, we can't be perfectly humble because we will still source our deeds in ourself. And a perfectly humble person would not source anything within himself, right? I am the machine. God is the operator. I'm the house. God is the indweller, right?
Could you give an example, please, of what is exactly imperfect humility? He explains there what's perfect humility, but what is imperfect humility?
Imperfect humility is when you are doing all of the right actions to be humble, all right? But you are not, but God is not in the picture. So you've got all the right actions down, all the right attitudes down, saying all the right words down, but you are still constantly in danger of being wrong, in the fact that you can become proud of being humble.
I'm so humble. I'm doing all the right things. I'm very
Right.
humble.
Yes,
Yeah.
I look how spiritual I am. I meditate more than anybody else. I have longer prayers than anyone else. Blah 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 blah.
Mhm.
Uh, so those are all false humilities. Even though you're going through all the thing, you're waiting till the end of the line before you get your lunch. You're taking the dust to the Swami's feet. You're doing all the right things humble wise. But inside, it's not based on God, so it's not based on something permanent, right? And you are still the doer of that humility, and so it will change, it will fall, it will falter, at times. What's that, Haima?
Swami, can we call that humility or is it a pride? Like I did this, I do that, and I know people who says that all the time. Is that humility or kind of rajoguna?
Well, it's
It's like being proud of themselves that they're doing this. They have to say it loud.
yeah, I mean it is what it is. It's still
Yeah.
signs of humility, but it's not a lasting or genuine humility because it's not sourced in the knowledge of something bigger than yourself.
Hmm.
It's not expressed through a sense of surrender
Yeah.
to the perfect, to the divine. It's a doing on your part. And anytime there's a doing on the ego's part, you can know it can't stick
It's
to,
not exactly.
yeah, it can't stick to its reason, right? So labor and toil as much as you can and know how to acquire for yourself the true knowledge and experience of yourself as the wretch that you are. All right. So as your ego self, again, this is what he's talking about. The only time that wretchedness is your nature is when you are putting the ego in charge of your life. And then I think that soon after you will have a true knowledge and an experience of God as he is, not as he is in himself, for no one can experience that except God himself, nor as you shall experience him in blessedness, both body and soul together, but inasmuch as this is possible, and as it is his good pleasure to be known and experienced by a humble soul living in this mortal body. Right? So that's all he's saying. Just labor long for your perfection and labor as you go. And yes, at first your humility is going to be of this imperfect type, but keep laboring and keep pushing, keep purifying mind, and eventually it will come to a pure humility, to where there simply is not the thought of me and mine, let alone the thought that I am humble, right? You wouldn't start any sentence with I in that one. Nor must you think, because I set down two causes of humility, one perfect and the other imperfect, that I wish you to leave off striving for imperfect humility and concentrate entirely on acquiring the perfect. Indeed, I do not believe that you could ever so acquire it. Right? So he again is making the point that imperfect humility is something we're going to move through as we practice yamas and niyamas, do's and don'ts, right? As we practice those without the experience of our nature, there's going to be pride and looking for results and all of those things which are not helpful to varying degrees at first. And in time, we'll suffer from them, and in time, we'll become aware of the problem, right? And then little by little, we begin to move our sense of self out of mind and into heart. And as that happens, our humility becomes more and more pure until it ultimately reaches perfect humility, which means I'm not the doer. I do not see myself doing any virtue or vice. God alone is the operator. I am the machine. And so you don't take stock in a horse in the race, so you don't bet on either side. You're just observing the race for its own sake. And I think that soon after you will have a true knowledge and experience of God as he is, not as he is in himself, for no one can experience that except God himself, nor as you shall experience him in blessedness, both body and soul together, which inasmuch as this is possible, and as it is his good pleasure to be known and experienced by a humble soul living in this mortal body. Now you must think, because I set down two causes of humility, one perfect and the other imperfect, that I wish you to leave off striving for imperfect humility and concentrate entirely on acquiring the perfect. Indeed, I do not believe that you could ever so acquire it. But I write as I do with this intention of letting you know and showing you the worthiness of this spiritual exercise and above every other bodily or spiritual exercise which men can or may perform by grace. How that hidden love, raised up in purity of spirit upon this dark cloud of unknowing between you and your God, delicately and perfectly contains in itself the perfect virtue of humility, without any particular or clearly defined sight of anything under God. Right? So he's really just saying that it's our divine nature, right? That humility is the result of us being true to Satchit Ananda, and that it will rise and it will manifest as long as we keep remembering presence, keep ourselves sitting before the divine. And also I wish you to know what perfect humility is, and set it as a sign upon the love of your heart. And do so both for you and for me, since it is my wish by this knowledge to make you more humble, For it often happens that a lack of knowledge is the cause of great pride, or so it seems to me. Right? Exactly. Pride is very rarely calculated. It's just a violation of knowing who you are and not acting according to nature, but acting according to hunger, to whims of mind and body. Right? So if you want to be right, act only from God, from the nature of God, which is love, wisdom, and being. And don't let anything else motivate you except for those. Again, it might be that if you did not know what perfect meekness is, you might think because you had a little knowledge and experience of what I call imperfect humility, that you also reached perfect humility. So you would deceive yourself thinking that you were very humble when in fact you were wrapped around in foul, stinking pride. So let yourself So set yourself to labor for perfect humility, because its nature is such that if a man has it, and as long as he has it, he will not sin, and afterward only a little. Right? So this is have that realization. That's what Thakur says. Get this realization first, and then go into the world. Get this knowledge of yourself first, and then go get a job. Right? Get it set in yourself that you are Satchitananda, that you are looking through the mind and riding in the body, but that you are not either of those, that you are not dependent on either one of those. Because this brings out that notion from the Vedanta that a realized soul cannot take a wrong step. Right? Once you have rid yourself of ego, which of course is a very, 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 very rarefied event. But if one is able to get rid of egoism, then he cannot take a wrong step because nothing is inspired in him that doesn't inspire from Satchitananda, right? So there's no hunger or sensual input or memory input that's causing the action. It's always an outpouring of the love that one has become aware of in the thought of God, right? And so we fill ourselves up with that to a level of bliss that then begins just pouring out of us. We're always content. So we walk into every room, we're content. And there's a way that a content person sits. There's a way that a content person speaks, and this will be aware. This will be of general awareness. People will see it. People will know, right? I've seen people respond to great swamis without any prompting on anybody's part. The swami walks in the room, they recognize the quality of this person. They may not know what it is or why, but they will be quiet and they will defer to it. I've seen it again and again. So, chapter 15, a brief refutation of the error which maintains that there is no better means of humbling oneself than by calling to mind one's own sinfulness. Okay, good, because that does not work, and you should not do that. So he says here, have a steadfast trust that there is the sort of perfect humility mentioned above, and that through grace it can be acquired in this life. I say this to refute the error of those who declare that there is no more perfect cause of humility than that which springs from the awareness of our wretchedness and of our past sins. Okay, this is somebody who has been browbeaten with sin. He's saying there's no way to get to humility from that way, or to true humility, which I couldn't agree with him more. If you identify yourself as a sinner, you're broken, and you will always be broken. Now, you may not be arrogant, but in your insistence on your humility, you will be proud. Right? So it's not going to go anywhere. I readily grant that for those who sin habitually, as I do myself and have done, here is the most necessary and expedient cause. Semicolon. To be humbled under the awareness of our wretchedness and of our past sins until such time as the complete rust of our sins is for the most part scrubbed away, according to the witness of our conscience of our spiritual director. But to others who are for all intents and purposes innocent, who have never sinned seriously with determined will and awareness, but only through frailty and ignorance, and who set themselves to be contemplatives, and to both of us as well, if our spiritual director and our conscience alike bear witness to our proper amendment in contrition and confession and satisfaction according to the law and ordinance of the Holy Church, and as long as we are aware that we are moved and called by grace to be contemplatives, there is then another cause for being humbled. This is far above the first as the life of Our Lady, Saint Mary, above that of the most sinful penitent in the Holy Church, or as the life of Christ is above that of any other man in this life, or as that of an angel. My goodness gracious. What does this guy think he's saying? This sentence has been going on for the entire paragraph here. All right, what's he saying, though? Let's do this last paragraph because I think he's just saying the same thing there that he's been saying. He says, if there were no more perfect cause of humility than to see and experience one's wretchedness, I would like to ask those who allege this to be true, under what cause were they humbled, and who never saw or experienced wretchedness, nor stirring of sin, nor ever shall, as it is of our Lord Jesus Christ, or Our Lady Saint Mary, and all the saints and angels in heaven? It is to this and to every kind of perfection that our Lord Jesus Christ himself calls us in the gospel. There he tells us that we must be as perfect by grace as he himself is by nature. Right? So, for the person who says there's no way to perfect humility except through the attempt of humility, he's saying this can't be true because Mother Mary was from birth humble. Jesus was from birth humble. They didn't have to go through that period of trying to be humble or trying to practice their humility. So he's saying no. And we know, of course, as Vedantins, we know that this humility is due to nature, right? If we see our oneness with everything, that's the antithesis of egoism, right? And egoism is absolutely necessary for pride. You can't be pride without an I to be proud of. And so he's saying, that is the nature of this self. The nature of self, the true self, is humility, right? That it can't be the result of another thing. And things that are not results of another thing are things that are of our own nature. Our ability to love is not due to anything but the image of God that was placed within. Our ability to learn and grow from our mistakes is nothing more than the presence of God's intelligence within us. The ability to sit in silence and to attain ecstatic states is because our true nature is pure love. And when we come to the place where we haven't blocked that out with our egoism, that's what we experience. All right. Why don't we stop here? The beginning of the next chapter for next week.